You and I have to look at this and understand this, that the ballot is as powerful as the bullet.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Hello and Happy New Year, Happy 2025. Welcome back to Season 3 of Only Human. You know about what we're trying to do here, get better where we are with the resources at hand. And in Season 3, we're going to talk a lot about helping others to do the very same thing. So you may have already noticed some changes. We have a new introduction, a new look, and we've got a few new features, which you'll see throughout this next podcast. We have learned a lot from you, and I wanted to thank you for listening in and following and sharing for our first couple of seasons. So we're going to do some things differently based on your recommendations, but our focus is going to remain the same, getting better by virtue of things that we can do for ourselves and to ourselves. So today, as we ring in the new year, we're going to dive into the idea of New Year's resolutions, beginning like we do with the end in mind, to quote Stephen Covey again. We're going to talk about New Year's resolutions in terms of when we quit them and when we give up. It sounds pretty pessimistic, I promise you. It's not going to be. Most of our New Year's resolutions simply aren't going to work. There's been tons of studies on that. In fact, there's even something out there called Quitter's Day. It's observed on the second Friday of January, and it marks the point, data-driven, by the way. It was coined by data analysts that were studying fitness app usage patterns. So people get a new app for I'm going to work out, and basically that point where that begins to die off is the second Friday in January. In 2025, that is January 10th. That's the point where our enthusiasm, our motivation, things we've talked about before, right, begin to wane. And you've heard multiple times on this podcast that motivation, enthusiasm is temporary. And that's why we have to have things like resolve, which is permanent. So we're going to talk a little bit about our New Year's resolutions and maybe give them a little bit better chance of working this year, right? So we have a couple of new features, and I'm going to begin with one that's going to set us up for this discussion today, and it's called Blast from the Past. Right? Blast from the Past. Many of you know that in another pair of pajamas, I'm a military historian, so I love to pull examples from our history and use them to apply to the present, maybe even the future. So today we're going to talk about this period of time back in the formative years of the United States of America. When we think of the Revolutionary War, the image of George Washington crossing the Delaware often comes to mind as a turning point, and it was. But a turning point for what? Right? The other image that we need to keep in mind about the Revolutionary War was the brutal winter at Valley Forge, where George Washington had to hold together an army that he couldn't pay, that he could barely feed, and that he had to train and was training with Baron von Steuben, who'd come over to try to make our ragtag army of patriots into a professional fighting force. It was this winter that transformed the army into a cohesive fighting force that would eventually defeat the British and create the conditions for our great nation. But let's set the record straight. Valley Forge wasn't a battle. It wasn't fought against our enemy, the British. Valley Forge was a crucible. Right? It was a test of resolve. It was a test of leadership. It was a test where generals and colonels and officers and men were reshaped by the cold, by the hunger, and by the relentless training drills under von Steuben. How could men persevere when they weren't getting paid? They were away from their families. They were freezing to death. They were starving. What kind of men were these? And a lot's been talked about Washington's leadership during that time, and maybe sometime in the future we'll talk about that too, but I don't want to talk about that today. I'd like to rewind a little bit to December 1776, the year before Valley Forge. It was just a year earlier when Washington's army was on the brink of collapse militarily, right? The weather and storms and all that stuff weren't working against them, and they hadn't huddled them into Valley Forge yet, but they were getting their butts beat by the British and the British's mercenaries. So in December 1776, when morale was low, initial enlistments were expiring, and the British seemed unbeatable, Washington did an audacious move that turned the tide of the war. It was called the Battle of Trenton. On Christmas night, Washington led 2,400 troops across the ice-choked Delaware River. In the dead of night, it's said that many of these men didn't even have boots, or their boots were so worn that 2 weeks later, when people came to look at the route that they had gone to Trenton, that march, there was still blood on the ground that they could see from the feet. So Washington knew that the Hessian army was going to be partying there at Trenton, completely off guard during the holiday, and so he conducted this surprise attack, which was a resounding success, and they captured over 1,000 soldiers. And they made a big cause celebre about it, and it completely reinvigorated the American cause. A huge tactical win, but it wasn't just a tactical military win. It was a long-term psychological one, because it proved to the colonists and to the soldiers that a scrappy army could take on the best that Europe had to offer. And it laid the groundwork for future victories when the odds were stacked against them, including our eventual triumph at Yorktown, right? But here's the kicker. Without Trenton, that winter at Valley Forge, that crucible, might never have happened. The army might have disbanded without ever trying to fight through the environment and get the training they needed to become a professional fighting force. Trenton was a spark that kept the flame of the revolution alive. A reminder that even when we want to quit, a memory of a single success, a single victory, can change our entire outlook. So, what's that got to do with New Year's resolutions? Basically, that we don't have to keep them all, that quitting isn't permanent, and that starting is important, but there's some wisdom around how we begin to build change in our lives, how to sustain that momentum. Here's a hint, it's not just through motivation. And how we can use this blast from the past to tie it all together, right? So, looking back at this whole idea of Quitter's Day, it's pretty obvious, to me at least, and it should be to those of you that have listened, that people don't realize that a noble goal does not necessarily come prepackaged with the resolve that it takes to achieve that goal. It comes with the motivation, it comes with the inspiration, two really important things to get the ball rolling. But absent the resolve, persistence, resilience to overcome some setbacks, odds are, come January 10th, many of your New Year's resolutions are going to disappear. So why is this significant? Because it's not just about gym memberships, right? It reflects a pattern of human behavior that we face anytime we're trying to address a challenge. So I don't know, someday maybe, I'm often asked that rhetorical question, if you could go back in time and talk to any one person, who would it be? And of course, based on my faith, I'd love to go back and talk to my Savior, Jesus Christ. But if it were from my historical point of view and I wanted to learn and know a few things, George Washington definitely comes toward the top of my list. And I would want to know, what was he thinking on the Battle of Trenton? Was he thinking, I need a victory? I think I can achieve one here? Or was he really projecting long term into the future on what that victory might mean? I don't know, but it turns out that it was pretty important, right? Because his organization, maybe even his own psyche, was on the brink. Morale was low. Defeat was inevitable, and he needed a small win, right? And it wasn't just a small win that he achieved. When we make our personal resolutions, whether it's at the beginning of the year or sometime during the year when we say, you know what, I'm going to, sorry here, my computer's binging at me. I've got a Teams call that I forgot to turn off. That's going to be my resolution. Make sure you shut down Teams before you do your podcast. So when we make a resolution to change anything, maybe in the middle of the year we say, you know what, I'm going to quit smoking, or I'm going to quit drinking, or I'm going to do something different. I'm going to get more exercise, whatever it is. And we make that commitment. The thing that we need to anticipate is the day that we decide we want to stop. Right? And so the importance of building momentum and persistence towards that inevitable spot when we are down on our motivation and we say, you know what, screw it, it's just not worth it. That's what we have to build toward. Now, having said that, there's nothing permanent about quitting, right? And there's a ton of quotes out there. I'm going to get to a second new feature for us today in just a second about what people say about quitting. And I'm not sure I agree with most of the smartest people in the world, because I quit on things routinely. But I guess I'd rather rephrase it as I take operational pauses, right? I have books over here in my file cabinet. Tells you how old I am, right? I actually have a metal file cabinet with paper in it that have been sitting there for 15, 20 years unfinished, right? The thing is, I may at some point want to finish them, and I'm not going to waste the effort that I put in to get to that point, right? I took a pause. I quit temporarily, and I can pick that back up and move it forward again in the future if I so choose that that's the best use of my time and my energy. So what happens a lot for people that want to achieve, and I think I'm one of those people. I think you wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you weren't. We set unrealistic expectations. We tend to focus on the end goal. What will it look like when I'm 30 pounds lighter, right? Both those things are probably good because we've got to have that motivation. The third kind of thing that we do that gets in the way and can prompt quitting day to have a little impact on us is we don't have a support system, an internal psychological, psychosocial support system that keeps us going past that point that we know is coming, that point where we say we want to quit, right? And that's why I've always talked about resolve as being that magic thing. We expect that point to come. I expect that point when my fitness program begins to hurt and I've got too many other things pressing for my time and attention. I expect that challenge to come. And I've already thought about how I'm going to push past that. Right? I've got some strategies for success, which is our next little section. And these are well known. All right, start small, make achievable incremental changes to whatever you're doing, right? But think big, right? Think about when you lose that 30 pounds and celebrate when you lose the first one, right? I like to use Trenton as that metaphor. Find that small little success that says, you know what, I can do this. And then if you've got support systems, a workout buddy, even one of these fitness apps that helps you, use them, right? And then the last thing I think is really important, and it's important for everything we do on Only Human, is focus on the why rather than the what. The why is I want to get healthy. I want to lose that weight so that I'm healthier. I can live longer. I can continue to serve my mission of helping as many as I can for as long as I can, rather than the what. The what is 30 pounds of fat, right? The why is longevity, legacy, connections, helping others, my purpose. So the next thing I'd like to do is, if I can click here on my screens and get this to come up just right, is I want to look at, I'm calling this segment What the Real Smart People Say. And typically what I do is I'll go out and I'll look for a bunch of quotes about the smartest people in the world that have talked about this topic. And then I want to either agree with them or disagree with them, but I want to leave them in the minds of the listeners here. So here's a few of them on quitting, right? It's always too soon to quit. That's Norman Vincent Peale. He says, it's a timeless reminder that when you are thinking about quitting, if you delay that just a little bit, you may recover the motivation to keep going. All right, that one's okay. Napoleon Hill has a slight change on that version. He said, effort only fully releases its reward after a person refuses to quit. Effort only fully releases its reward after a person refuses to quit. Now that's only human language right there. What it's saying is that refusal to quit has benefits of its own, right? So I'm pushing forward, I've come up against these walls, and now I'm ready to quit, but I don't. There is something about that moment when the muse or the magic or something in the universe tells us, okay, you were tempted to quit, you didn't, here's your reward, right? I really like that one. And this one builds on that. This is from Ross Perot, famous businessman, politician, kind of an interesting guy that I had an opportunity to hear live on more than one occasion. And he said this, he said, most people give up just about when they're about to achieve success. They quit on the 1-yard line. They give up at the last minute of the game, only a foot from the winning touchdown. The thing is that we don't know that when we quit. We often don't know how close we are to getting those rewards that Napoleon Hill told us about. And here's the last one on this particular section. Then I'm going to move to another section of quotes. This is from Lance Armstrong, who's kind of a complicated figure, right? He was the guy that won a whole bunch of Tour de France's and said, I've never done anything illegal, and then came to find out he was blood doping and all these other things. So complicated guy, but he says pain is temporary, but quitting lasts forever. He's talking about that when we quit, it becomes easier to quit, and we can't forgive ourselves for it. I believe I shared this story that I've played sports my entire life, but going all the way back to high school, one of the most horrible moments of my life that created a self-loathing in me that lives to this day is when I fumbled the ball in the end zone against a high school rival, and we were getting our butts beat so damn bad that I just turned away from the ball when I could have dove on top of it, and it would have been a safety instead of a touchdown for the other team. I quit, right? They beat me to the point where I quit. I've never forgiven myself for that moment, and I've used that as leverage to push through to the next thing. I might take temporary pauses, but I don't quit on anything anymore, and certainly not when I'm getting my ass beat like the Novi Wildcats were doing to me back in 1973 or 74, I guess it was. So anyway, pain is temporary, quitting lasts forever. That's Lance Armstrong. All right, so I want to switch over to some wiser people, right? Albert Einstein said this, and it's not specifically about quitting, but it kind of is. He said, it's not that I'm so smart, I just stay with problems longer. I think you could say the same thing maybe about Thomas Edison, right? All those failures as he was trying to figure out what the right gas and filament it was that he needed to put together to create the incandescent light bulb. It's not that I'm so smart, it's just that I stay with problems longer. Well, Einstein was a pretty smart guy. but his curiosity, right, helped him stay with a problem. He knew, actually like Edison, that there was a solution to what he was thinking about. And he knew he was closer than anybody else, so he was going to keep pushing till he got it. Every failure became one less thing, or one more thing that didn't work, and one less thing that he had to try to find what was work, or what would work to solve that equation or build that light bulb. Right? And then this last one is one that ties into where I want to kind of complete today's cycle of New Year's resolutions, quitting, operational pauses, and where we're going this season. It's from a lady named Marianne Radmacher. And Marianne Radmacher said this: courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I'll try again tomorrow. I think when we start big, bold things, which New Year's resolutions should be about, right? Big, bold things, big changes in our lives, big changes in the world, right? That we have to, anticipate those long, hard days where we're going to be tempted to say, is this worth it? And hear those little voices in our head tell us that there's other ways to spend our time and other things to spend our energy on. But as Radmacher says, courage is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I'll try again tomorrow. I'm going to go get a good night's sleep. I'm going to have breakfast. I'm going to come back, and I'm going to stay on this, right? That next step toward Trenton through boots that wouldn't keep your feet warm, let alone protected. Right? That next drill from Von Steuben when you're hungry and freezing and there seems to be no reason to go on. Right? The whole concept of making a determination of to change for the better is only human, and it's in its absolute essence. It's what we want to do. How can I get better tomorrow by virtue of what I do today? And then how can I make the world better and others better by virtue of what I do today? That big goal, that big thought, that big idea that we are getting better, we're not going to quit, all those things, that's wonderful. But it's not, we cannot sustain that motivation because motivation is temporary. We've talked about it, it's chemical, right? We get excited and we have all these endorphins running around and then they wash out of our system and we sit there and we're tired and we're hungry and we're frustrated and all those things. And that's where the truly tough-minded, the people with resolve, smile. That's where we smile and say, I've been waiting for you. I've been waiting for that moment when you tried to knock me off this project, this goal. And you know what? Maybe you beat me for the rest of the day. Maybe I'm going to go watch some goofy TV or read some science fiction or mess around with my horses or my dogs or something like that. Maybe you've beaten me for today, but you're not going to beat me forever because I'm going to come back and try again. So I hope that today has been kind of a nice setup for how we're going to come at this Only Human podcast. Please like, share with your friends, subscribe, follow, whatever you do on your podcast platform. I promise this year, I resolve that I will continue to bring high energy, high impactful topics, not only through my podcast, but by participating with others. We're going to try to link with other podcasts where we'll have their hosts on and they'll have me on, and we're going to discuss a lot of these things and link in. So if you got some ideas on who you'd like to see on this podcast or whose podcast you'd like to have me on, please send those to us. I'm at Tony@convergentperformance.com. I think we respond to every email we get, so please keep the feedback coming. Love mail, hate mail. We don't care. It's all good to us. All feedback is good feedback. So as we roll into 2025, I'm pretty psyched about it. I'm pretty excited about it. I have some real positive New Year's resolutions of my own, and I'm going to close with sharing them. I am going to write 3 books this year. I am going to, by the way, I have a new book coming out under my pseudonym. If you don't know that, it's Buck Miles, M-Y-L-E-S. It's called 13 Bullets. It's a thriller, political military thriller. I think you enjoy that. But I'm going to write the second book of that saga. There'll be a 6-book saga about a hero named Blue Walker. I am going to write a nonfiction work under my own byline called The Unraveling, that talks about the way our culture has been in decline and maybe some things we can do to put it back together. And then I hope to finish a third book, as yet untitled, that is a follow-on to Armored Knight, which is more about psychosocial wellness and mental health. So those are my 3 writing goals. I have one reading goal. I am going to finally study and get through the Old Testament of the Bible. I'm kind of a New Testament Christian, and a lot of that stuff I've just sort of let sit, and I've decided that this is the year that I'm going to plow through it and learn from it. So those are my resolutions. I have many more, but those are the big ones as it relates to my podcast group. And with that, I'd like to sign off here at about 25 minutes, which is the duration we're going to shoot for, so these things don't push too long. They're good for a commute, and we don't babble on about things that aren't all that important. So remember, grow where you are with the resources at hand, getting better every day, and we will see you soon after Quitters Day.